Yo, the Dark One here. Today we're taking a history lesson in PC gaming. We're taking a look at the success, pitfalls and the future of PC gaming. I want to delve deep into the details about why PC gaming is so important, how it revolutionized some aspects of gaming, and how it's shaking up the entire industry. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. And now let's get right to the video. If I have to ask people to give me a starting point for where PC gaming really started to get popular, I would get a lot of different opinions. Some will say that it all started with Space War in 1961. Others will say that that's too obscure. King's Quest and Space Quest is where it's at. Some will argue that titles like Wing Commander, X-Wing and TIE Fighter brought massive attention to PC gaming. I can partially agree with those answers, but in my opinion, Wolfenstein 3D and Doom really showed the world what PC gaming was capable of. When Wolfenstein released in 1992, nobody at the time had seen such a marvel. Its creators, id Software, managed to create the first game that managed to simulate a 3D environment. Levels were pretty basic, consisting of samey looking corridors, packed with enemies like soldiers and attack dogs. All you had to do was kill everything in your path, find the exit and proceed to the next level. By today's standards it looks very simple, but back then this was never seen before cutting-edge technology. The successor to Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, released 1 year later and it improved in absolutely every aspect. The level design was much more complicated. There were more weapons, more enemy variety and a lot of secrets for players to discover. It was also a very innovative game for other reasons. The first level of Doom was distributed to many magazines and electronic stores for free, making it the first shareware software, the ancestor of the video game demos we know today. Another aspect of the game that was revolutionary was the local network support and the first ever multiplayer deathmatch, which allowed players to play against each other in different online arenas. Doom was so groundbreaking for the time that almost every game in the following years was basically a clone of Doom. Some were very successful, like Duke Nukem 3D, which spiced things up with a charismatic protagonist that dropped as many iconic one-liners as there were bullets in his weapons. Others took the first-person genre in a different direction, like System Shock, a first-person RPG by Looking Glass Studios that tried to implement deeper story elements in the experience, making the story and characters feel more realistic. In 1996, id Software released their next big hit, Quake, a fully realized 3D shooter that offered better player movement and you could actually look up and down for once. The multiplayer aspect of Quake cemented the arena shooter as the top multiplayer experience of its time. Furthermore, Quake was one of the first esports that pitted top players against each other in big tournaments with cash prizes. And so QuakeCon was born, and it's still going to this day. While id Software were focused on improving the first-person genre, another studio was aiming at improving the real-time strategy and action RPG genre, and that studio was Blizzard Entertainment. Their first game in the RTS genre was a game called Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. A small and simple game that would later on become a franchise that would take the world by storm. As the first title in the series, Warcraft Orcs and Humans was very limited in its design. Looking back gameplay-wise, the game was very tedious, with the long-distance mining and only 4 selectable units at one time. Where it shined though was the story, unit design and funny dialogue some units had if you clicked on them many times. In 1995, Westwood Studios released Command & Conquer, which really showed what the real-time strategy genre was capable of. The game had better unit selection and pathfinding, interesting balance choices of each faction, which did not mirror in units like Warcraft, and the ability to issue multiple commands at once. Blizzard really took notice of their competitors' innovations and added them to their sequel, Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness, which also released with the first iteration of Blizzard's own multiplayer network, Battle.net, which was revolutionary in itself because it allowed owners of Warcraft 2 and other future Blizzard games to play with each other without the need to be in a local network. In 1997, the first ever massively multiplayer online role-playing game, Ultima Online, was released. It allowed players to play together and roleplay as heroes of their choosing, cooperating in the first ever raids in gaming. No other platform at the time allowed the use for internet integration, which allowed for players from all over the world to play together. PC gaming had a big advantage over console gaming, because while couch co-op play is fun, nothing beats long-distance play with tens of thousands of players. In the same year, the first ever 3D real-time strategy Total Annihilation was released. It took full advantage of the developing PC hardware, which allowed developers to create more complicated and realistic game worlds. Later on in the year, Blizzard released their critically acclaimed action RPG Diablo, which had insane levels of replayability and a unique and scary gothic medieval atmosphere, which was made even scarier with monsters like the Butcher. With the development of Voodoo graphic cards, the complexity of game began to rise. In 1998, Valve, a studio created by an ex-Microsoft employee, Gabe Newell, created the groundbreaking game at the time, Half-Life. The game completely changed the first-person shooter genre. Up until that point, first-person shooters didn't rely too much on story. They were basically levels filled with enemies that had to be killed. You just grabbed the key and then proceeded to the next level. Half-Life showed gamers that through in-game cinematics that didn't interrupt the game flow and good voice acting, you can create an experience that was unheard of at the time. As well as taking full advantage of hardware at the time, Half-Life also introduced artificial intelligence that was revolutionary. The soldiers you were facing would flank you, run for cover, communicate with each other, rush you or throw grenades. Valve also welcomed the modding community to try and create something with the game's engine, which would result in the creation of Counter-Strike in the future. Also in the same year, Thief: The Dark Project was released by Looking Glass Studios. The game was revolutionary at the time because it allowed players to hide in the shadows in order to avoid patrolling enemies. Not only that, but by using the tools at his disposal, the player could actually manipulate the environment by making it darker. It was also one of the first games to use a dynamic sound detection system. That means that you walking on different surfaces makes a sound that enemies in the area can hear. The audio design was also revolutionary because voices and sound effects sounded differently depending on the position of the source. In 1999, PC gaming exploded even more with the advancements in GPU graphics by Nvidia, which brought about computing power which took computer games even further beyond. With the arena shooter craze in the 90s still going strong, Epic Games released their own arena shooter, Unreal Tournament, which was a worthy opponent to id Software's own Quake 3 Arena. Both games had a unique arsenal of weapons and creative, well-designed maps that really pushed the level design forward. Blizzard Entertainment, on the other hand, released StarCraft, an RTS that is much more than Warcraft in space, with 3 factions fighting for dominance in the Koprilu sector. The game would later on become the most popular esport in South Korea, garnering millions of viewers from across the world. While on the subject of RTS games, Age of Empires 2 released in the same year, bringing even more players to the genre. Another title worthy of mentioning is Heroes of Might and Magic 3, a simple turn-based strategy at first glance, but with very deep game mechanics that urge you to plan your strategies accordingly. It is one of those games that has almost infinite replayability and very addicting gameplay. You start with the intention of playing for 1 hour, but end up playing for 6 or even more. On the MMO front, EverQuest was released within that year. Looking at it now, it seems the game was a precursor to which all future MMOs would be based off of, with a third-person perspective and navigation throughout the world. And last but not least, we have System Shock 2, a game so ahead of its time that people didn't know how to respond to it at the time. This game revolutionized the immersive sim genre by creating a game world that felt alive and lived in. Every piece of scenery on the Von Braun seemed like something that could probably be real in the future. The RPG mechanics for a first-person shooter were also very innovative, as you can build your character in any way you want it. Be it a soldier wielding heavy weapons, a psionic caster, a hacker, or a mechanic, it was definitely a unique experience having to go against the rogue AI Shodan. Around that time, the movie The Matrix was released to wide acclaim. It tackled concepts like reality and free will, and what if everything was a simulation and we were being controlled. The movie was so influential that almost every game developer wanted to implement its aspects into their game. And so, with the coming of the new millennia, we received the masterpiece that is Deus Ex, the immersive sim to rule all immersive sims. The story about government conspiracies, secret societies, world domination, war on terror, a spreading virus and the need for vaccines has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, making Deus Ex the most red-pilled game out there. Story aside, you could tackle challenges in any way you see fit. You can go around the environment sneaky-beaky like, or you can go guns blazing. Your actions shape the story and how certain characters react to you. You can even choose different thought-provoking endings. Every person on the planet should play Deus Ex at least once. It's a very educational experience. A lot of the events that happened in the game somehow ended up happening in reality as well. Moving on, we have another Blizzard masterpiece, Diablo II. When this game came out, millions of mice across the world screamed in agony. Easy to understand, hard to master. Diablo II offered unseen amounts of build customization options. The music, the story, the darkness, the classes, it all came down to create a memorable experience. The randomized levels created a sense of novelty every time players started a new game, and it's always satisfying to see hordes of monsters getting mowed down by your spells and abilities. Every single ARPG after that was a Diablo 2 clone. Few managed to match it, and only one managed to surpass it. Modding has always been one of the biggest strengths of PC gaming. A strong example of that was the full release of Counter-Strike, the game that dominated all computer clubs when it released in the year 2000. Valve really made the right call when they recruited the developers of this mod for Half-Life. Making a headshot with the Desert Eagle and seeing that splash of blood as the body falls backwards is one of gaming's most satisfying moments. Another exceptional title was Hitman Codename 47, yet another revolutionary game that further improved the stealth game genre. It was one of the few games that took advantage of ragdoll physics at the time. Also, you could tackle missions in multiple ways. You could even change clothes to fool your enemies, which was a game mechanic unheard of at the time. The soundtrack by Jasper Kidd was phenomenal and was just a little piece of what this genius composer would do in the future. But the most impressive tech that was created in the first Hitman was the perfect stairs walking animation. I mean, look at that, it's perfect. In 2001, PC games proved that they could also be mediums for blockbuster storytelling with Max Payne by Remedy Entertainment. The way this game portrayed its dark and gritty story shook the gaming industry in a positive way. Nobody could have dreamed that you can tell such a compelling story with comic book style cutscenes. Furthermore, the writing behind it all was Oscar-worthy. As for the gameplay, as I mentioned before, The Matrix was still an inspiration for game developers. They wanted to recreate the dynamic gun battles from the movie within Max Payne. That's when bullet time as well as shoot dodge were first introduced in gaming, and the results were spectacular. On another note, while most games were pretty linear with narrow corridors with little space to maneuver, Crow Team decided to make something completely different with Serious Sam: The First Encounter. The landscape of the levels were so big that it took a lot of time to move from point A to point B. While you were moving, you were attacked by hordes of enemies. There were actually so many enemies attacking you at the same time that you can say that things were getting pretty serious. Having 50 enemies attacking you at the same time was something unheard of at the time. I remember that I was too scared to play this game when I was a kid because of those freaking clears and headless kamikazes. Just the sound of those hooves and screams gives me anxiety every time I play. As we are on the subject of shooters, how can I not mention Halo Combat Evolved, a game that took single-player and multiplayer experiences to a whole different level by adding cool vehicles that can be driven around and over the bodies of your enemies. The story and design of the world was breathtaking. I remember the first time I crash-landed on Halo. I looked up, following the ring with my eyes above and behind me. It is very rare for a game to make you feel like you are a small part of something bigger, a theme that the Halo series have adopted and improved with each iteration. The AI of the Covenant was also revolutionary. They jumped out of the way if you threw grenades, hid behind cover if you break their shields. It was like they were being controlled by other players. Oh man, and who could forget the iconic Warthog run at the end of the game? Ah, the memories. In 2002, Blizzard released their ultimate masterpiece, Warcraft 3: Reign of Chaos, my favorite game of all time. Everything about this game is timeless. The story, the characters, the graphics, the gameplay, even the soundtrack. The game came packed with a world editor that allowed players to create their own experiences with custom maps and campaigns that rivaled even those that Blizzard themselves created. Eventually, an entire new gaming genre was created, called the MOBA, which is now a huge franchise with several studios making big profits out of the idea and hugging most of the spotlight in the esports scene. Speaking of multiplayer games, DICE released Battlefield 1942 in the same year. A game that revolutionized big multiplayer battles with vehicles and aircraft playing a big role in the fighting. You could even pick a specific role like a medic on our assault class, each one being crucial for victory on the battlefield. Another great PC title of the year was The Elder Scrolls Morrowind, a game with so much content that it was unreal for the time. You could pick different classes, choose from a huge variety of spells that are actually more than what we have in Skyrim. A truly ambitious title for the PC. And last but not least, we have Jedi Outcast. I remember when I first saw this game being played by someone in the computer club. I couldn't believe that there is such a perfect Star Wars game where you can use blasters, force powers and lightsabers all at the same time. When I finally managed to get my hands on it, I actually got stuck on the first level where you have to put in the code for the bridge. This game was insanely old school hardcore in a sense that you either get vaporized by those freaking snipers or you get stuck because you have to solve poorly explained puzzles or you have to find a hidden vent that takes you further. Jedi Outcast is a very difficult game, but in my opinion, it's the best Star Wars game ever made, only rivaled by Jedi Academy. In 2003, the granddaddy of all AAA military shooters, Call of Duty, was first introduced. A lot of people don't know that there was a time when a COD game was actually focused more on single-player campaigns more than multiplayer. COD 1 actually has the longest campaign of all the Call of Duties and the hardest one at that. People who had to defend the house for several minutes in the Russian campaign know what I'm talking about. It was still a time where you could quick save and quick load your game. Crazy stuff. As for the multiplayer, it was a time before the 360 no-scope auto-aim galore. A more civilized time. A time when your reflexes and aim, not aim assist, mattered. Well, to be honest, grenade spam was still an issue, but we won't mention that. Another notable title of the year I could mention is Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic. While I can't say that it is better than Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy when it comes to gameplay, I can't deny that the story and characters are the best thing that was ever introduced into the Star Wars lore. This was a time where BioWare were still at their prime and had the talent and dedication to create intriguing stories moved by strong characters. 2004. Oh man, that was probably the best year for PC gaming ever. It was the year that PC games were actually ahead of their time with graphical and gameplay innovations. I remember when Half-Life 2 dropped. My PC at the time was struggling with the hardware demands that this game had. It introduced physics technology that blew people's minds. Not only that, but its shaders, dynamic lighting, face motion capture technology rivals games released even today. So many memorable moments. The introduction to City 17, the chasing the canals with the airboat and the helicopter, fighting your way through a zombie-infested Ravenholm, trying not to step on the sand in sand traps, the Strider battle in the ruins of City 17, throwing combined soldiers into each other with the empowered gravity gun. Speaking of the gravity gun, every game after Half-Life 2 had some kind of object mover. It was just something so innovative that everyone wanted to include it in their own game. id Software responded to Valve with their own graphical juggernaut, Doom 3. Oh man, this game scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. The claustrophobic atmosphere, the sounds of the level's metal platforms creaking, monsters moving in the darkness, the dynamic shadow effects, all made up for a phenomenal experience. This game was so revolutionary that you could only play it on PC because no console could handle it. Well, to be fair, you could play it on Xbox, but it was a much inferior experience compared to the PC. To answer Doom 3's challenge, Epic Games released Unreal Tournament 2004, a game more focused on multiplayer with some of the most unique weapons in gaming. The same year, another studio called Crytek would release the first Far Cry game, which also relied on physics integrated in gameplay, and it was also the first game that introduced the technology for simulating a fire that spreads, burning all vegetation around the point of impact. Even though the voice acting wasn't very good, it was still a solid PC game. In 2004, Blizzard released a game that helped them take over the world and garner unimaginable success, World of Warcraft. This game was a phenomenon. It took all the good elements of MMOs of the past and mixed them with their already famous Warcraft universe. The result? A super addictive game that had over 10 million players at its peak. I remember the first time I played WoW with my Orc warrior. Just seeing other people walking around, doing quests, dueling, playing together. I've never felt more connected and absorbed in a virtual world before. It was a dream come true to explore famous locations like Orgrimmar, Ironforge, Stormwind, Mount Hyjal, and more. Just seeing Archimonde's corpse there gave me an nerdgasm. I'm grateful that WoW gave me and many others the opportunity to explore the world of my all-time favorite fantasy series, even though I stopped playing shortly after. In 2005, the graphical juggernaut train didn't stop. Monolith released their masterpiece, Fear. If Doom 3 was the master of dynamic shadows, this game was its only competitor. The lightning effects in Fear were just mind-blowing for the time. The way that you could shoot an overhead lamp and see it move around, creating realistic shadows, was mind-blowing. Furthermore, the particle effects this game offers when you are in a firefight and you can slow everything down really makes you feel like you're in the Matrix or a John Woo movie. And then there are the horror elements that are masterfully crafted. Dealing with Alma added another exciting layer to the game on top of the excellent firefight sections. And the AI, ever since Fear came out, I haven't seen smarter opponents in a video game with the exception of another game developed by Monolith, Condemned Criminal Origins, and the Splicers from bioshock. That same year, DICE released Battlefield 2, which took all the elements from 1942 and Vietnam and made them even better. Now in a more modern setting, it was one of the first military shooters to tap into that era. Later on, id Software released Quake 4, which was the second game after Doom 3 that used the id Tech 4 engine. Unlike its predecessor Quake 3 Arena, Quake 4 focused on the single-player aspect. It also introduced a new unique perspective in the war between the humans and the Strogg. At one point in the story, you get captured and go through the Strogg factory, getting your limbs chopped off so you can become a cyborg slave. But just before they get to your brain, you are rescued. The unique thing about being a Strogg was that now you could understand their language and use their technology. A very solid experience all in all. In 2006, Prey, the third and final game to use the id Tech 4 engine, was released to critical acclaim. Instead of normal arsenal, you use the severed arms of your enemies as weapons and small living creatures as grenades as you make your way through the alien ship that you are being held captive on. Not only that, but you also change the gravity of some rooms. Before Portal even came out, Prey was already using the Portal technology to create seemingly impossible connections between spaces. The enemy design was also very cool, with some awesome boss battles. It's a shame that the sequel got cancelled. Later that year, Relic released Company of Heroes, the real-time strategy that changed the genre and had some pretty sweet multiplayer as well. Developers further improved their previous ideas from Dawn of War, like getting resources from capture points, and implemented it perfectly. Not only that, but they built upon the squad mechanics from their previous game and made it the focus of Company of Heroes. What we have is a game that makes you come up with tactics on how to proceed your squads through cover and take out the enemy positions and vehicles. Speaking of strategy games, 2006 was the year that Medieval Total War launched. Man, this game blew my mind back then with the gigantic battles and the detail every unit had at the time. Castle sieges were also something that was very innovative of the time, as siege engines would poke holes in walls and they would eventually crumble and you can invade the city. All I did in this game was playing quick battles, non-stop, just zooming in on the cavalry as they went around the flank of the enemy's army, proceeding to ram straight into their backline. And here we arrived in 2007, probably the last good year for PC gaming ever. It was the year that many developers stopped caring about the advantages that computers offered and moved on to develop titles tailored for console releases. So many legendary PC games came out that year that I actually think that 2007 could surpass even 2004. First on we have Crysis, developed by Crytek. When this game came out, it completely melted everyone's PC at the time, and the meme "but can it run Crysis" was born. From a graphical standpoint, this game was 10 years ahead of its time, and it shows just what you can accomplish when you have no console hardware limitations. The levels were gigantic and you could complete them in any way you wanted, utilizing the powers of your nanosuit. You could go invisible and bypass everything without firing a single shot, or you could demolish entire bases with your arsenal and offensive abilities. You were free to do anything you wanted on this beautiful tropical island. It was in that same year that we also got Bioshock, developed by Irrational Games. Man, this game just blew everyone away when it released. The art style, the city of Rapture, the splicers, Big Daddies, Little Sisters, everything about this game was so unique and captivating. It is very rare for developers to create a world so detailed and multi-layered that it makes video games being considered as an art form. The weapons, complemented by the plasmids you unlocked, made every battle tense and rewarded experimentation. Furthermore, the enemy AI is probably one of the best I have ever seen, rivaling that of Fear. Splicers heal themselves at first aid stations, jump in the water if they are on fire, and run away and hide if they are at low HP. Truly, this game is a masterpiece. Next we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the last COD game that was PC orientated and had mod support, with the exception of World at War. I remember when I played the demo at a friend's house in 2007. Initially I was skeptical that a modern setting would work, but when I first put on those night vision goggles, my opinion completely changed. The dark and gritty campaign was in stark contrast to Infinity Ward's previous works, which were more heroic and campy. This time we had some brutal and oftentimes heart-pumping moments, like shock and awe and Ogi lead up. It is obvious that they put a lot of passion and creativity when they were making the fourth entry in the franchise. The real game changer was the multiplayer. Modern Warfare completely changed how we play games online, introducing kill streaks, weapon unlocks, perks, and most importantly, those numbers that come out when you kill someone, which every game since has copied. All of this made Call of Duty the mega franchise that it is today, churning a new game every year. Next we have The Witcher, CD Projekt Red's very first game that put them on the map. It was one of those few games that really immerse you into their world, with impactful storytelling and locations. Even though the game had a lot of technical problems when it released, a lesson we still haven't learned it seems, the developers kept working on it and later on released the Enhanced Edition for free, which really fixed a lot of bugs and glitches the game had at the time. This act of love towards their games really showed to the gamers that CD Projekt actually cared about delivering a good experience. The year wouldn't be complete without mentioning Valve's Orange Box, which contained Half-Life 2 and all episodic content, Team Fortress 2 and Portal. Portal was a game engineering marvel that incorporated puzzle-solving rooms that had unheard of complexity at the time. It was all complemented by a well-written and funny dialogue that had a lot of dark humor in it. Team Fortress 2, on the other hand, first introduced the goofy, cartoonish animated style long before every big game started doing it. As for the gameplay side, Team Fortress 2 had amazing maps and balance, while it also incorporated a lot of user-generated content, which is one of the reasons that the game has an active player base even in 2021. Unfortunately, this would be the last big year for PC gaming for a long time, as a lot of game development was shifting towards console exclusives, and with a good reason. It was the end of the golden age of PC games and innovations. Dark times were coming upon anyone who would consider themselves PC gamers. Unfortunately, we must start with the facts. A lot of studios that were developing PC-oriented games had to close down over the years. For example, Looking Glass Studios, the creators of the Thief franchise, had to close down shortly after releasing System Shock 2 and Thief 2, because even though the games were excellent and all the critics praised them for being innovative and inspiring, they didn't sell very well. As much as I hate to say it, developing games for PC was an ungrateful job at the time, because even though a game takes full advantage of the capabilities of computers and it's very good, it would still get pirated and developers would get nothing for their hard work. On the other hand, it is very hard for console games to be pirated, because in order to do so, you need to put a special chip in your console that allowed pirated games to run. The whole thing was risky because the installation of the chip could break the console and make it unusable, which deterred a big majority of people to even try. This meant that a lot of developers wanted to sell their games on a console, which in turn would be safer and more beneficial. Let's face it, you can't force a simple console controller to complete tasks better than a keyboard and mouse. PC games like System Shock 2 and Deus Ex are so complex that you will have an inferior experience when you play them with a joystick. And even so, developers would still port computer games to console to boost their poor sales on PC. All of this resulted in sequels to popular PC games that were watered-down console ports. Let's take the sequel to Deus Ex, Deus Ex Invisible War. This game is a prime example of how hardware limitation really bring a project down. The awful interface, poor controls, smaller levels to compensate hardware, and constant loading zones were a giant downgrade compared to the first game. The problem was that developers weren't used to such hardware limitations. 1 year later, Thief 3 suffered the same fate. Although it was a really good Thief experience, capturing the tense atmosphere of the originals, it had smaller maps cut into two with loading zones, which were still smaller than the ones in 1998. Not to mention that the game had an infuriatingly buggy movement system, which was unacceptable in a precise game like Thief. Another reason for console-oriented sequels for PC games was the release of Microsoft's own console, the Xbox. Microsoft was recruiting studios to make games for their console in order to compete with PlayStation and other big names in the market. An example of this is Serious Sam 2, a great game I enjoyed very much, but a far cry from the originals. It looked gorgeous, but the levels and enemy numbers were smaller than the original. It also tried to copy Halo a little bit too much with the vehicles and grenade spam, losing a bit of its identity. The trend of downgrading games would continue with Crytek and Monolith. They were studios that prided themselves on taking full advantage of PC hardware and had no choice but to water down their games so they can fit in the console market. Crysis 2, for example, really alienated PC fans with the more linear and simple game design, while Fear 2 Project Origin had watered down graphics and, worst of all, dumber AI. Another trend that was happening was that PC-oriented developers were so pissed at the low sales and piracy that they decided to not even bother with a computer version of their games. The most notable examples are Halo 3 and Gears of War 2 and onwards, which were only developed for Xbox since they can make a lot more money there and cut the cost of a computer release. It was a very dark time for people who were calling themselves PC gamers. The only bastion of PC gaming standing strong through those years were Blizzard and Valve. Everything else was either closing down or being swept away to the console shores where the money was at. Things got so bad that around that time computer games were receiving the worst console ports in history. Some games like bioshock had problems with running on widescreen monitors. Nothing all that bad, but nothing came close to the port for GTA 4. In my opinion, that is probably the worst console port ever. So bad that it doesn't even function properly to this day. Badly optimized and almost unplayable at launch. It wasn't surprising that Rockstar Games didn't care all that much since they were making a killing on other platforms and PC sales were not very impressive. In 2010, Rockstar didn't even bother to port Red Dead Redemption to PC because it wasn't worth it. I remember feeling so sad and hopeless thinking about all the games PC gamers were missing out on. Looking back, I couldn't blame game developers for considering the PC platform to be inferior in terms of profits and success. The landscape was riddled with piracy, and there was hardly any way for game studios to protect their intellectual property on PC. It was a dark and hopeless time to be a PC gamer. While everything seemed lost, one man kept going forward. One man knew the potential of the PC platform and never gave up. That man is our Lord and Savior, Gabe Newell. When Steam came out in 2003, it was nothing like the juggernaut it is today, because back then it only had 5 games on it, and its main use was to patch the games Valve would release. As time moved on, more and more features got added in, and Steam was becoming something really special. In my humble opinion, the main reason why PC gaming is where it's at today is mainly because of Gabe Newell and his team at Valve. In 2013, Steam became the largest digital distributor, owning 75% of the market share at the time. The Steam sales have made purchasing games very easy and at acceptable prices. The main reasons behind piracy was that gamers didn't have enough money, or they were physically incapable of buying the games they wanted. With Steam and other emerging platforms, it has never felt better to be a PC gamer. But it wasn't only Steam that helped PC gaming. Some hardware companies like Nvidia created graphic cards that allowed unique gaming experiences like enhanced physics. Notable examples of this are the Batman Arkham series and Borderlands 2. That innovation really pulled the interest of many gamers when it was first introduced. Another big part of the resurgence of PC games is owed to the many indie developers that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. I can't go on without mentioning Minecraft, the game that let players' imaginations from all over the world run wild. At the time, I actually thought that this game was some sort of joke. When my best friend first introduced me to the game, I couldn't believe him when he told me that there was no limitations to the things that you could do in the game. I thought to myself, how can you do anything? It's just blocks. But after playing a little bit and surviving that first night, I was hooked and quickly changed my opinion of the game. The team at Mojang created an entire new genre, the survival genre. Every single developer wanted to create their own version of Minecraft, but only few were actually very good. Notable examples for good successors to Minecraft are Terraria, Subnautica, Ark, and Rust. Titles that actually put their own spin on the survival formula and were successful. It was also thanks to Steam that indie developers have managed to flourish thanks to the early access section. And even though some developers have misused the early access platform, a lot of great and now finished games were born there. One of PC gaming's biggest strengths, modding, also turned very beneficial for the creators of the Warcraft 3 custom map Dota, as they would find huge success in creating Dota 2 and League of Legends respectively. Valve saw the potential of the game after the success of Riot Games' own League of Legends. Now both of them are gigantic esports that draw millions of viewers from across the world. Not only that, but Twitch and YouTube have been of great help promoting indie developers. For example, it was thanks to PewDiePie that Amnesia: The Dark Descent garnered the popularity that it did back then in 2011. With the ability of easy distribution and better anti-piracy measures, PC gaming today is in a far better place than it was years ago. Things are going so well that some Xbox and PlayStation exclusives are actually getting ported over to PC for the first time in many years after their release. I just hope that more console exclusives make their way to PC so we can enjoy them in 4K 60 FPS as it was meant to be. If not, there are always emulators for old games that have no chance to be brought to PC. In conclusion, I am very happy for the state PC gaming is in right now. The competition between Steam and Epic might have been rough, but competition is always beneficial to the consumers. It's been a long road. A lot of exceptional PC games that changed the industry have come out during the years. Today, hardware on all platforms is almost at the same level, so we can expect balance on all gaming fronts. Finally, for the first time in years, the future of PC gaming is looking bright. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I hope you liked the video, it took a while to make. If you have any feedback, please share it in the comments down below, as it helps me improve the content of the channel. Once again, thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more.